Hello, sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Thanks for joining us. Here in a second, you're going to see our poll that will be coming up. We'd like you to complete it. There it is. Thank you for joining us. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulties there. We're going to go ahead and get started here in a minute, but thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you doing this quick poll, completing it. And we will start here in just a second. If you're just joining us, please complete the short poll that you're going to see on the screen. And we're going to start here in a second. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Sharon Smith. I'm Assistant Director of Metro Public Works. And I want to thank you for joining us today to learn more about composting in our webinar called The Dirt on Composting. Composting is one of the best ways you can reduce the waste at your home and something simple you can do in your backyard. If you're just joining us, please complete the survey. I'm also now going to introduce Jen Harmon, who is our Waste Reduction Program Manager and responsible for putting together this webinar and all of the information we have on composting. We're going to wait just a second here for a couple more people to join and complete the survey you're going to see on your screen. But Jen, you can just go ahead, and Jen, you're on.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks everybody. Again, reiterating the apologies on the little hiccup at the beginning, but thanks so much for joining us and for taking our poll. I'm going to go ahead and close it now. This was just an interesting opportunity. I'm going to share the results with everybody. So it looks like most of you have never composted before, so that's really exciting. I hope after today's webinar, you're going to feel ready and prepared to jump in and get started on composting. We've got a few pros in the audience, so I probably could learn something from you all, but we'll go ahead and get started on the presentation. All right, so today we are going to, my slide is not advancing. There we go. All right, so today we are going to learn about the benefits of composting, what composting is, and how to get started composting in your backyard. So the presentation is going to last about 45 minutes, and then there's going to be time at the end for questions. We're also going to be doing a Menti quiz for an opportunity to win one of 2 Earth Machine compost bins. So if you've never used Menti before, we'll make sure to give everyone ample time to get started on there, but I just wanted to let you know we're going to be using that if you have used it before and want to get that ready to go at menti.com. And then this presentation is being recorded, so after the presentation, you'll get a follow-up email next week that's got the slide deck as well as the recording and some other useful links for you as well. So you'll get all of that information. So let's go ahead and get started. So why compost? Why are we even talking about compost? Well, in Nashville, 1/3 of what is being thrown in the trash is food and yard waste. And ultimately that all ends up in a landfill where when it decomposes in a landfill, it turns into methane gas, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. So landfills are regulated by the EPA to minimize their harmful effects on the environment, but ultimately all of that food waste, that 30% or over 30% of that food and yard waste can all be kept out of the landfill through composting. So it's great for the environment and for our community, but also it's great for your yard. Composting, it not only reduces that methane gas in landfills, it also creates a natural soil amendment that it improves the health of your soil and it helps plants grow. So before we jump into how composting works, it's important to note that composting is just one of many strategies to reduce our food waste and our organic waste. The food waste pyramid here, it follows the same principles of reduce, reuse, recycle, and organizes the ways that we can reduce food waste from the most effective to the least effective for our environment. So the higher up on the pyramid, the strategy, the more benefits there are to our community and to sustainability. So at the top, you've got reducing the amount of food, that surplus food, that food that goes uneaten. Some ways you can do this at home is paying attention to your portion sizes, not making more food than you know you're going to be able to eat. Also storing fresh produce in ways that'll help it last longer, and making sure you're not buying too much fresh produce that you can't use before it goes bad. Below that is donating extra food to feed the hungry. So this is something you can participate in food drives, or if you have a business or organization that has food waste, there might be some opportunities to donate that to places like the Nashville Rescue Mission, and there's other places here around the city that not only helps us reduce our waste, but it also is a huge benefit to the community to help feed those in need. Below that, you can also use food scraps that might not be able to be donated. Those can be used to feed livestock. You can also use oil and food scraps to create energy, such as biofuel. And then below that is composting. So I kind of think of composting similar to recycling. It's at the lower part of this reduce, reuse, recycle pyramid. However, it's still a really important strategy in how we reduce our waste. So looking at these other opportunities and strategies first, and then if you can't do those, there's definitely going to be lots of opportunities then to compost. So as a city, Nashville is looking to all of these different strategies, in particular with our Zero Waste Master Plan, which aims to reduce all of our waste that we send to landfill by 90%. So in addition to increasing recycling programs, reducing our construction and demolition waste, one of the biggest impact areas of this plan is to reduce our food waste through food donation and through composting programs. So this includes a long-term goal to incorporate curbside food scrap collection, as well as getting the chance to educate you all on how to get started on backyard composting. So we're excited to be able to do that today. So let's jump in. What is compost? Compost is just a product that is made from the natural decomposition process of anything that was once alive. So through this natural process, organic materials rot to the point where other plants can use their nutrients. And a great example of this is the forest floor, of how this process happens regularly in nature. As limbs and leaves fall off trees and they pile up, they eventually decompose, which enriches the soil to help other plants grow. So home composting is just a way to manage this process so that it's faster and more convenient. And the resulting compost, again, it's a natural soil amendment that's got some nutrients for your plants, and it really does improve your garden and your yard soil. So the decomposition process is a natural process, and it requires a certain set of conditions to take place. So first you need your decomposers. They're the ones that are going to do the heavy lifting. They break down the organic material, and this is mostly going to be microorganisms like bacteria, but it can also include fungi, earthworms, snails, slugs, millipedes, and a whole host of other bugs and little crawling things. So these organisms, they're what eat and digest all the food and plant material to then create the compost. And to keep them happy and thriving and doing that job efficiently, you need, well, of course, you need your food, your organic material, the food and yard waste that we're going to talk about. And then you need oxygen, moisture, and also heat helps the process. So the food, oxygen, and moisture, these are all elements that we're going to talk about that you can control and you can adjust, whereas the heat is actually produced by the decomposers during the composting process. So as these decomposers eat all the food, it causes the compost to heat up. So there are two basic methods to backyard composting: passive composting and active composting. And they differ really mostly on how much effort you want to put into making your compost. So active composting or hot composting, it's as it sounds, it's more labor intensive, it's an active process. It requires that you're regularly monitoring your compost, turning your compost, and making adjustments as needed to keep those decomposers in the optimal conditions to keep them thriving and happy and hungry. So for truly active composting, it's best to build your entire pile at once. And we'll talk about how to do that. So if you want to include food scraps, though, if you're wanting to be really active in your composting and building this full pile, you will have to collect and store those food scraps. So keep that in mind if you want to be more active about your compost. But the biggest benefit of this method is that it's going to be a lot faster to get your final compost product because your microorganisms are working a lot harder, they're working a lot faster. But that also means that since those microorganisms are working faster, they're going to heat up the pile a lot more. So active composting is also sometimes called hot composting and can reach some of the higher temperatures. Now, if your compost reaches 131 degrees Fahrenheit or more for 3 days consistently, that's when you can start to see some higher levels of pathogen reduction and killing some weed seeds. Really 150 degrees or hotter is going to be best for that, but you can get some of those hotter temperatures with active composting. With passive composting, it's a little more hands-off. It's the kind of let it happen on its own method. Everything rots, so just you add your ingredients to the pile and really let nature take care of the rest. So there's very little maintenance with passive composting. You do want to monitor your compost for any signs of problems, but ultimately it can just be left alone to do its thing. So this method is great if you don't have the energy for doing a lot of the turning, getting in there and turning it with a shovel. You don't necessarily want to pay as much attention to your compost. It also is great if you want to be able to add ingredients over time. So you don't necessarily want to make one big pile at once. You just kind of want to do it as you go, as you take food scraps out, things like that. So of course, because you're not necessarily keeping those microorganisms as happy, they're still going to do their job. They're just going to take longer to do it. So that means that the final compost is going to take longer, but it's still going to happen. Everything rots. So anything that you put in your compost bin is going to be something that eventually rots. So it's just going to take a little bit longer. And since they aren't working as hard, or as quickly, it's not going to get as hot. Your pile is still going to heat up, so there's going to be some pathogen reduction, but it might not be hot enough to kill some of those invasive weed seeds and things like that. So the reality though, especially for those of you that are new to composting, active composting takes a while to really master, and most backyard composters fall in between both of these methods. They fall somewhere in between. So I, for example, am a fairly lazy composter, and I maybe turn my pile maybe once a week, maybe every couple of weeks, and check on it occasionally. But I'm not necessarily out there every couple of days as you would be with active composting. All right, so really, as I said, everything eventually rots. It's just up to you how much work you want to put into the speed, how much work you want to put in to speed up the process. So let's get started with how do you build your bin? How do you put all these different conditions together? And it starts with your food and what you want to feed your decomposers. So as I said earlier, anything that was once alive or made from living matter can be composted. However, not everything should go in your backyard compost pile. The types of food you want to give your decomposers are things like vegetable and fruit scraps, coffee grounds, eggshells, yard waste such as grass clippings, twigs, dried leaves. You can also compost paper products that are shredded up like shredded paper, newspaper, paper towels, paper napkins, coffee filters. This image here also shows tea bags. So I just wanted to note that if you are a tea drinker, there are some tea bags out there that have actually quite a few that have plastic in them. So just make sure that you either do a quick Google search and make sure your tea bags are made of paper and not have any plastic in them before you toss them in your compost. Or if you're not sure, you can always just tear your tea bag and compost just the leaves and toss out the bag. And then you can also compost other fibrous material like pet hair or human hair. Pull it out of your brush and toss it in there. You just want to make sure that you're avoiding any hair or fur that's been treated, such as dyed hair, or if you've just put flea and tick medicine on your pet. And so all of that food, these are all the good things that you want to feed your compost bin. And also you want to make sure that your food is all pretty well chopped up and doesn't have a whole lot of huge chunks in it. The decomposition process happens on the surface of your material. So the larger the piece of material, the less surface area they have to really work to get all of that decomposed. So the smaller you chop it up, the more your decomposers can access it. And if you put in big chunks, it's just going to take a lot longer for that to decompose. So you want to kind of chop some of those big things up like broccoli stalks and things like that. So when it comes to food you do not want to give your decomposers, there's some top foods that you want to avoid that just really need a more specialized composting process. Things like meat and fish scraps, dairy, pet waste, invasive plants and weeds, or diseased plants, and compostable plastics. So unfortunately, backyard compost piles, they just don't get hot enough for the most part to manage these materials. Meat, bones, the dairy, the fish products, all of those will also attract unwanted pests, things like raccoons, rodents, that kind of thing, and you absolutely don't want that in your backyard. So make sure to definitely keep those things out. Cat and dog waste contains pathogens that you really don't want ending up in your yard or garden. So you want to keep that out as well. If you have rabbits or other vegetable eating, hay eating animals, those are fine. Chicken waste is fine, but make sure any of your meat eating pets, you keep their waste out. And then for the invasive plants, the diseased plants, any of those things that you don't want to introduce back into your garden, I recommend you just keep it out. If you master hot composting, that active composting, you could potentially kill off some of these weed seeds and that kind of stuff. But it's just a lot easier to not even put it in there to make sure you're not reintroducing that back into your yard or garden because it's something you didn't want in the first place. And then compostable plastics, they simply need a commercial process to fully break down. So you can take things like that to a compost drop off or something, but keep those out of your backyard compost. So now that you know what types of foods to give your decomposers, they also need to have a balanced diet. And the different food that, that you would put in your compost bin is broken up into two different categories based on their nutrient content. So it's there's two categories, the greens and then the browns. And green food is going to be higher in nitrogen, and it tends to be your wetter ingredients. So that's going to be your kitchen scraps, green yard trimmings. And then brown food has more carbon and is going to be dry. Going to be your drier ingredients like fall leaves, dried branches, wood chips, hay, eggshells, paper products, those kinds of things. And no matter what you throw in your compost bin, it will eventually rot, but making sure that you have a balance of these nutrients will ensure that the composting process happens most efficiently and reduces your potential for pests. So a good rule of thumb is for every amount of greens you add, to add 3 to 4 times that amount of browns on top. So you're looking at this by volume. So if you have a fistful of greens, you'll want, and this says 2 to 3, I've heard 2 to 4, just you want to make sure that you're getting a good amount of browns to your 1 part greens. So 2 to 4 parts, so 1 fistful of greens, 2 to 4 fistfuls of your browns in your compost to balance that out. So the browns help to balance out the moisture in some of your wetter greens, and they're more porous, providing needed oxygen. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. Now your browns, if you're ready to get started, you're really excited to get composting going, pretty much the number one thing people use for backyard composting for the browns tends to be dry leaves. So right now, of course, we're in the middle of summer and there's not necessarily a lot of dry leaves around. So that's where you could look at shredded newspaper, shredded paper, shredded cardboard, some of those things. Or you can also take some grass clippings, fresh yard trimmings, set them out, let them dry out in a pile, and then once they're dried out, you can start using those. So that's a good way to get started now if you don't have any dried leaves hanging around. So you've put your food in, now you want to make sure you've got your ideal compost conditions for your microorganisms. Make sure their environment is the best it can be for them to thrive. So the types of microorganisms that you want in your pile need oxygen to live. For a more passive composting approach, you can add twigs and sticks at the bottom of your pile and into the layers of your pile, and that can help maintain some pockets of air and airflow and oxygen throughout your pile. And that'll minimize your need to turn your compost. If you want to be more active in your approach, or your compost starts to become too dense and you need to add more oxygen, you can turn your compost. So turning your compost is just getting in there with a shovel, with a garden fork, or this is an image of a special compost turner, and getting in there and moving your compost around and stirring it up to create and introduce some more pockets of air and loosen things up. Yeah, turning that compost, it just creates more space in between all the different particles to introduce that oxygen. And then moisture, it's also required for your microorganisms to thrive. The green ingredients that you're going to add, that's naturally going to have some moisture in there, but you're likely going to need to add more to make sure that you have the right amount of moisture. So you can do that by adding things like, if you want to add more greens, adding some more grass clippings, things like that. But what I like to do is just leave the lid off of my bin whenever I know it's going to rain, to let some rainwater get in there, or if it hasn't rained in a while, I have a rain barrel, or just getting the garden hose out and spraying it down and making sure that there's some moisture in there. So really what you want to find in terms of your moisture content is that as it starts to decompose, if you were to grab a handful of your compost and squeeze it, there wouldn't be any water dripping out, it wouldn't be sopping wet, but it would also hold together. So it's kind of that balance between not being too dry and not being too moist. So just kind of squeezing it and it'll hold together. Another thing you can do to add some moisture, but then also add some good bacteria to help the process. If you have beer cans or wine bottles or yogurt containers or anything that might have a yeasty product in there, you can rinse those containers out. Of course, you don't want to put too much dairy in your pile, but rinsing out those containers is not going to be a problem and can introduce some good bacteria to help with the composting process and jumpstart that process as well. And then your heat, that again, it's not really something that you can control. It's a product of the activity of your microorganisms and your decomposers. So it's not something you're necessarily going to add or you're going to adjust, but it's important to just be aware of what the temperature means in terms of your pile. So if your pile is not heating up at all, and it doesn't seem like any of the decomposition is happening, then you might need to adjust some of your ingredients. Either maybe you don't have enough material in there to jumpstart the process. Maybe it's too dry, you need to add more water. Maybe you need to add more greens. So adjusting your ingredients to help jumpstart the process if it's not heating up at all and nothing seems to be happening. And then again, if it gets to that 131 degrees or higher, ideally 150 degrees or higher, that's going to be where you start seeing some of the killing of the weed seeds. I will say now backyard composting, it doesn't tend to get that hot. You really have to be pretty active with your compost typically to see some of those higher temperatures, but it's also important to note that if you are being active or you just you've got it really going, they can get really hot, and it's very unlikely to be so hot that it would catch fire, but that's something that is a concern at commercial compost locations. So just know that, you know, it does get really, really hot, and that is normal. So now you've got your conditions, you know what kind of food you want to add. Now it's time to build your pile. If you're composting food scraps, the most important thing that you want to do when you build your compost pile is to make sure that all of your food scraps are fully covered on all sides. So you're not adding those meat, dairy products that are naturally going to attract pests, but you also just want to make sure you're doing everything to prevent any kind of pests getting interested in your pile. So by covering those food scraps with browns, that's going to keep pests from being interested in your compost. And then additionally, layering your compost ingredients can make the decomposition process more efficient. So I like to start with some soil or some finished compost at the very bottom when I start, because that'll introduce some of those soil microbes into your pile, the decomposers, to get started. And then doing a healthy layer of browns that have lots of twigs and sticks to make sure that you've got oxygen there at the bottom of the pile. As you build your pile, of course, it's going to be heavier and heavier and sink down. So having those sticks and twigs in there just makes sure that again, you might not have to turn it as often, and make sure that you keep oxygen in your pile. Then adding your greens to the center of your pile and then covering that with more browns. After each layer of browns, I tend to add a little bit more moisture to it as well, making sure that there's plenty of moisture in there. I throw sticks in as I go along, and you can also every so often throw in more soil or finished compost, again, to just add more of those microorganisms and microbes to your compost. So that's pretty much it on how you build and manage and maintain your compost. These are some common issues that many composters, backyard composters can run into, and they're just a sign of things that you might need to adjust. So compost it shouldn't smell bad. If you're doing it right, it doesn't smell bad. It doesn't have that rotting eggs or rotting food smell. So if you start to have a pretty an odor like that from your compost, it likely means that it's too wet, has little oxygen, maybe you have too many food scraps or too many greens. So add in to fix that problem, add in those dry browns, such as the dry leaves, wood chips, stir your pile around to balance out that moisture and that oxygen, because it's likely just too wet, too many of those greens. Ants are another one. So there's going to be lots of bugs and creepy, crawly things all over your compost pile. So both ants and flies are not necessarily bad. It's just if you see them in very large numbers. So if your pile is covered in ants, which has happened to me plenty of times, it just means that your pile is probably a little too dry. So adding in some moisture, adding in more green, stirring things around. I often just get out there with my garden hose and spray it down if there's lots of ants in there. Flies, again, a few are not a big deal, but if you have a lot of flies, it probably means that there are exposed food scraps or it's too wet. So just make sure that your food scraps are covered. I know I use an earth machine bin and there's slits on the side. Most compost bins are going to have some availability of oxygen on the side. So just make sure that you're checking those as well. And making sure that food scraps that are further down your pile haven't drifted to those edges where some of those flies can get access. But yeah, just make sure you cover those greens and make sure it's not too wet to reduce those flies. And then rodents and other pests, likely as a sign, again, too many food scraps. Really, those pests are going to come around for those meat and fish and bones and dairy products. So just keep those out of your bin. And depending on the type of bin that you get, an earth machine bin is actually really great for keeping pests out because it's made of recycled plastic, so it's difficult for them to get in. So before you use your compost, you do want to make sure that it is fully done decomposing. And depending on how active you are with your compost, finished compost could take a few months to a couple of years to achieve. You can tell when it's done by how it smells. It's going to smell pleasant and earthy. All of the material is going to be fully decomposed unless you had a really big chunk of food in there that wasn't chopped up as much. But the majority of your material is all going to be pretty much decomposed. And then it's also not going to heat up anymore. So if you are actively turning your compost, you'll notice as you turn it, that helps it to heat up more. So it's going to stay pretty much at air temperature, and you're not going to see any heat coming off of it anymore. So that's how you know your compost is done. You have a stable compost, and then it's good to let it mature before you use it. So let it sit for a few months. It'll just make it healthier for your soil, and then you're good to go to use it. If you want to be extra sure that your compost is ready to be used on your garden, you can, or in your yard, you can do a germination test. So you'd fill 2 containers with moist compost, 2 containers with moist soil. You plant some fast germinating seeds in each container. Radishes are a good one. You cover them to keep in your moisture, and then after 5 to 7 days, check and see how many seeds have germinated. And if there are significantly fewer seeds that have germinated in your compost, then it probably is going to need more time. But after you've done it once or twice, you'll be able to tell when your compost is finished pretty easily. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a natural soil amendment that has all kinds of applications for your yard and your garden. You can use it to just improve your yard soil or help in establishing new grass or sod. You can mix it in with your garden soil when planting a vegetable garden. It's good for flower gardens. And there's all kinds of benefits. It does improve your soil quality because it improves the mobility, especially here where we have that, there's a lot of clay soil. So this improves the mobility of air and water and nutrients in the soil and helps that stuff be able to get to your plants. It does add some nutrients to your soil and makes other nutrients more available to your plants. It can remove the need for synthetic fertilizers. And it helps retain, helps your soil retain more moisture. So you don't necessarily have to water as often, which is great. And if you're not ready to use your compost, you can always store it. Just make sure that you keep it covered. All right, and no matter how you are using your compost, you're going to want to at minimum screen out or pick out any material that you don't want going in your garden or soil. Things like stray produce stickers, sticks or chunks of wood that aren't fully broken down. Pull those out and toss them in your next pile, but you don't necessarily want those big chunks going into your garden. And then any food scraps or anything that haven't fully decomposed, if it was a larger piece of material. Now, depending on how avid of a gardener you are or what application you might be using it for, you could get a compost screen to make the particles a lot finer, depending on how you want to use your compost. But no matter what, you just want to make sure that you at least pick out anything you don't want to put into your garden or yard. So you know how it works, you're ready to get started, and the first thing to do is to decide what kind of bin, where am I going to do this compost, what kind of bin am I going to use. So I've talked about the earth machine a lot because it's the one I use. It's also the one that we're going to raffle off here in a minute. So that's the one here in this bottom left-hand corner. It's made of recycled plastic, so it's nice because it's difficult for any of those pests to get in. It also has a door at the bottom and then a hatch at the top, so you can put your material in at the top, and then as things decompose and as the compost is finished, you can pull it out from the bottom. So it's a nice bin if you know, you're first getting started and you're able to just regularly pull out compost as it finishes up, which is kind of nice. So that's an option for you. In the middle is, it's a tumbler type compost bin. So this is called batch composting, which means that you compost in batches. So unlike something like the earth machine where you could put things in over time, for one of these tumblers, you put all the material in one side and seal it up until it's done. They are easy to turn, and so it is a little bit more of an active compost. And it also, they tend to be smaller. So if you're not wanting to compost a whole lot, this could be a great option for you. But it's not going to be something that you can regularly add things in over time. Then in the top right, you've got, there's all kinds of DIY build your own options for compost bins. This is a 3-bin system, which allows you these can be a little bit larger. So you've got more, if you've got more material that you want to compost, this is great for that. It also allows you to have different stages of compost going at once. And there's all kinds of different, you can make these from pallets, from all kinds of different materials, especially a lot of reuse materials, which is great. And then for those of you that are just wanting to compost yard waste, or if you live in a rural area, don't have neighbors anywhere close by, you can compost in a pile without a bin. But if you are composting food scraps, we don't recommend this for anybody in an urban setting because it could, there's more potential to attract pests since there's no protection of your pile. But if you are just doing yard waste, you can just do it in a pile. You don't even need a bin. So I've got a quick little video just to show you how to set up the earth machine, because we also have these available from Metro Nashville Public Works as well. So you can see they're really easy to put together, and those are the ones, again, that we're going to raffle off and that we also have available for purchase at a discounted rate at our Omohundro Convenience Center, which you can find more information about at compost.nashville.gov. So for collecting food scraps, if you are going to compost food scraps, you're going to make sure that you've got something to collect them in. There's all kinds of options out there. You could use the one on the top left is just a countertop version. It's got a carbon filter in there to help reduce the smell. There's all different ones of those. The one in the middle, using just a coffee tin or some large container that has a lid, works just fine. Freezer options are really great as well, because that's going to, you're going to be able to smash that stuff down and kind of get more in there. You can store it for longer since it's not necessarily sitting out, so it's not going to attract flies and things like that. So that's also another great option for you. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on, there's a lot of products out there on the market for composting, things that are called activators or starters, all these different things that are out there for jump-starting your compost or helping your compost thrive. And I just wanted to say that on this note, really, these mostly are doing one of two things. You're either getting something that's going to add nitrogen to your pile, or you're getting something that's going to add microbes to your pile. Anything that's going to add nitrogen, you already have all of that material at home. So all of your greens, those are the nitrogen-rich materials. So if you need more nitrogen in your pile, grab some fresh yard trimming, some fresh clipped grass, grab more food scraps, any of those green materials. Those are all nitrogen-rich materials. So if you need more nitrogen, you have all of that already at home. And then the microbes, one thing to also be wary about any of those products on the market with microbes is that sometimes the microbes aren't, you might get them and they might either not be alive, or they might not necessarily thrive in your bin. So you've got microbes and microorganisms already at home. Soil, dirt, finished compost after you've gotten started, or again, rinsing out a beer can, rinsing out a yogurt container, getting some of that yeasty bacteria. There's plenty of ways that you can do all of the same things with stuff that you already have at home. So you don't necessarily need any of these products. All right, so with that, you should be ready to get started composting. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick little quiz over what we talked about today. And the two people that win are going to get an Earth Machine compost bin. So our top two are going to win a bin. So go to menti.com, and then you're going to enter this code 720698. So I'm going to leave this up for just a minute so you can grab a mobile phone, you can grab, just open another browser window or an iPad and navigate to menti.com and plug in the code 720698, just to make sure everybody's got a second to do that. Okay, 720698. So you should be able to see this code at the top. All right, so 720698. So these are going to be a series of true-false questions. All right, and the person that gets the most right is going to win. Let's wait just one more second for anybody else to enter. Is there 720698 is your code? Okay, I think we've got everybody. If you still want to join, you should be able to see at the very top of your screen that it's got the code up there, 720698. We'll go ahead and get started. All right. True or false? Is it a good idea to put meat in your backyard compost bin? True or false? You have 6 seconds. All right. All right, false. You don't want to put meat in your backyard compost bin because it could attract pests. All right, let's check out our leaderboard. Okay, we've got a lot of people at the top. All right. Answer fast to get more points. True or false? You should feed your decomposers a balanced diet of 3 parts browns to 1 part greens. So do your decomposers want a balanced diet? True or false? True. Yes, you do want to feed your decomposers a balanced diet of approximately 3 parts browns to 1 part greens. All right, most of you are doing excellent. Let's see where we're at. Okay. Who's at the top? Joanna. All right, Joanna and Brianna. Let's go for our next one. The faster you answer, you're going to get more points. True or false? Anything that was once alive can be composted. Is this true or is this false? Anything that was once alive can be composted. 3, 2, 1. All right, true. Yes, anything that was once alive can be composted. It just might not be that you want to put everything in your backyard compost bin. All right, who's at the top? Is anybody? Oh, have we switched? Has anybody? Okay, we have switched our leaders, but they're still the top 2. There's still time to win. Answer fast and you'll get more points. True or false? You have to stir your compost every day. Is that true? Is that false, that you have to stir your compost every day? 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Everybody got that right. Absolutely, that is 100% false. You do not have to stir your compost every day. Like I said, I stir mine maybe a couple times every other week. Okay. Oh, I think we still have, oh, Olivia's moved up. We still have another question to go. True or false, adding a little beer to your compost bin is good for your microorganisms that decompose your compost. So is adding a little beer good for your compost bin? True or false? True. Awesome. Everybody got that one too. Fabulous. Yes, adding a little bit of beer can add some of those nice yeasty bacteria that'll feed on your compost bin. Okay, let's see where we're at. Oh, and Brianna is our winner, and Olivia, it looks like she came in at the last second and jumped Joanna. So Brianna and Olivia, congratulations. Both of you are going to get an Earth Machine compost bin. So to claim that prize, if you could go up to your Q&A, so you should have at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little Q&A, and just let us know that it was you. Just type in, say, hey, I was the winner, and we'll be able to pull your email address, and then we'll email you with instructions on how to get your compost bin. Congratulations. Awesome. And congratulations, everyone. It seems like most of you got the answers pretty much right. So that's awesome. All right, so before we hit the questions, just a couple things. So if you're not necessarily ready, you're still hesitant on getting started backyard composting, or maybe you have other products that you want to compost that you can't do in your backyard, there's so many other options for you. There's drop-off compost and grease at our convenience centers. So we have compost drop-off that you can take that ends up going to our contractor, so it goes to a commercial composter, so you can put more things in there than you could in your backyard compost bin. So those meat, bones, fish, dairy, that kind of stuff that you don't want in your backyard, you can put in one of our drop-off locations. So you can check at compost.nashville.gov and you can get all the information about what we accept there. And then you can also get curbside collection. The Compost Company and Compost Nashville both offer collection services. So they're a great option as well if you don't want to drive to the drop-off. If you have kids and you want to compost inside, or maybe you're in a small apartment and don't really have room for backyard composting, you can compost indoors with worms. It's a really fun activity, and it's creates a really, really nutrient-rich product. So that's a lot of fun. We've got information about that on our website as well if you go to compostingeducation.nashville.gov. And I'll send you all links to all of this in the follow-up email, so you don't have to remember that per se. And then the green cone is also another great option if you are an extra lazy composter and don't want to get any actual compost material, you just want to reduce your food waste. The green cone is a really great option. It is a little bit more expensive, but essentially you can put a lot more stuff in there. You can put meat and some of those dairy fish products in there, and it's going to just essentially turn to, it dehydrates everything and it takes it away. It just magically disappears. So that's also an option for you as well if you're wanting to be extra lazy. All right, and with that, these are some resources for you. All of these are active links, so when I send you the PDF, you'll be able to click on any of these, but they're here for you if you want to write down some of it. And with that, I'm going to open it up, Sharon, if we have any questions.
We have some great questions. All right, first question, is there any issue with ink on newspaper?
That is definitely a good question. Newspaper isn't that bad, but you might want to steer clear of some of the glossier magazines or dyed paper. Stick to kind of the white paper and pretty plain paper is a good idea. But newspaper, typical newspaper is fine.
All right. Is Metro Recycling part of the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, which I believe is supported by NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, which chose Nashville in 2015 as a pilot city to help initiate projects to reduce, recycle, and reuse food waste?
Yes, we Public Works works very closely with the National Food Waste Initiative and are part of their steering committee. And Sharon, you've got some more historic knowledge than I do on our partnership with them, but we've absolutely been involved and worked together on reducing food waste for sure.
Yes, we were part of that initiative from the beginning and supplied a large amount of information and support to the research that was done. Additionally, when they did their bin digs, where they actually had people keep a log and separate out their food waste, and they also went to restaurants and various places and pulled food waste, we set up a spot on the main Public Works campus where their volunteers went through the food waste and divided it into different categories, including what could have been donated. You know, it was interesting to see at one point they got bags and bags of bread. And sometimes there would be a huge amount of things like eggs. So what they did was they looked at what kind of food could have been donated out of that and didn't really need to have been thrown away. And that was one of the ways that they really promoted the Feeding Hungry People initiatives, because so many people still, even in Nashville, go to bed hungry every night. But that's a great question. We were very excited to be part of it. All right, Jen, next question. How do you keep the layers of brown and greens when you're turning it?
That is a good question. So those layers are definitely, if you're more active, they're gonna get turned over and they're not gonna be those layers anymore. So that's just a good idea for understanding how you want to build your pile when you first build an active compost, if you want to do a full pile, and just also to help you understand when you're adding material into your pile, how you want to do it. But as you turn it, those layers are definitely going to disappear. You just want to always make sure that as you do turn your compost, that ultimately at the end of the day, all of your food scraps are covered with browns, or they're still on that interior part of your pile.
All right. Is mold formation bad? And what do we do if it arises?
So when for example, my collection bucket that I have sitting on my countertop pretty regularly gets some mold in there. That's not a problem. You can throw that in. Once you throw it into your pile with your, with your browns, and you get that stuff mixing in, you shouldn't really see a whole lot of mold as it starts to decompose. But mold, really, it's not a problem. It's doing its thing. That's how it rots.
And if you do see some mold, probably what you need to do is mix it up. It probably has just been sitting there too long and needs to be kind of poked about, mixed in, and it will probably go away. All right,
Yes.
Here's a great one. I have the earth machine and put sticks for the bottom layer. It has been 5 months and the sticks have not broken down. Should I take them out, or why are they not breaking down?
Oh, that's a very good question. So if you just have a big layer of sticks and you don't necessarily have all those other bits and pieces that are, in there, those particles, it might just be that you don't. Oh, that's a good question. I would imagine that you just don't have enough material surrounding those for the decomposers to get in there and get to all of that material. Sharon, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, you don't necessarily want to have an entire layer of sticks. The purpose of sticks is to have it mixed in so that air can get in. And the
Yeah.
sticks themselves may not completely decompose, but the reason you have them is, well, the reason I would have them is so that because I'm the lazy composter and don't want to get out there and poke it and turn it a lot, and sticks just help to keep it aerated.
So it might be good for you if you're having a hard time getting that stuff moving down there. If you can pull some of them out, that might help you out a little bit down there if you can pull some of them out.
Absolutely. How long can you store compost, Jen?
Oh, you can store it for a pretty good amount of time. You just want to make sure that you keep it covered. I honestly use mine pretty quickly, but we've got a whole bucket of it that, we've had for quite some time, and it's just fine, probably a couple years.
All right, I love this. I heard something about adding 7-Up to the compost pile.
Oh, I've never heard that. I'm definitely going to look it up, and I will share that with everyone in my follow-up email next week.
Yeah,
Unless you know, Sharon.
Well, I don't know, but I am going to surmise that the 7-Up or sodas are sweet, and so those sugars probably feed the little organisms. They probably like it. I don't think I would go out there and pour a whole bunch of 7-Up on it, or beer for that matter. You want to drink your beverages, but putting a little bit on them is certainly not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
All right, how about this one? I have chickens, so I constantly have chicken waste. I know I can't use it every time. I have a pile, so how often can I add? So can I add the chicken waste to the compost? I think I will need more than one pile, or I'll need to get a bin.
I will be perfectly honest. I am not super familiar with using chicken waste. So if you can share your email Sharon, we've got that question in the Q&A. We'll follow up with you by email unless you know more about it, Sharon. I just haven't dealt with chicken waste in my experience.
Yeah, generally speaking, you don't want to put any type of pet waste, including chicken waste, in your compost. That's just not something that you're going to want to have in the compost that's then going to go around your fruits and vegetables. Oh, chicken waste is fine. I'm talking to an expert from Volunteer Gardener who is very knowledgeable about compost, more so clearly than Jen and I, even though we consider ourselves to be experts. Chicken waste, but it's going to take 6 to 9 months to decompose, according to Julie Burbilia with Volunteer Gardener. Thank you, Julie. All right. Metro picks up branches 4 times a year. Do they shred and chip this, and is it available for pickup free from residents?
So it does get mulched. We have a contractor that mulches that down. You can pick up mulch from them, but I don't believe it's free.
It is not free. Yeah, once we pick it up and take it to the contractor, it becomes theirs. Metro doesn't actually do the grinding and turning and turning those wood waste into mulch. All right, here is our last question. How much are the Earth Machine compost bin? I got one years back, but a critter chewed a hole in it. Oh my God, oh my God. Which I've blocked with a plastic bucket lid. That is just wrong. Jen, what do you think?
They are $50 at our Omohundro Convenience Center. That is very unfortunate. But if it's still working for you, I of course always say if it's working, continue to reuse it. You could also use some of that that hardware cloth as well. That can help keep critters out. But if you want to get a new one, we absolutely do have them at Omohundro for $50.
All right, that is the end of our questions.
Well, that is wonderful. I do want to circle back and just make another comment regarding the how long you can store your compost for. I did not mention it's good to know as well that, if you're storing it for a long time, it might not be as not be as effective as a soil amendment. So just keep that in mind as well. If you don't necessarily want to store it for a really long time because it's just not going to be as effective.
All right, we have one more question, and I'm going to put a link in here because it is specific to our yard waste collection. I am going to be popping I'm going to try to pop a link to where you can see the places that you can drop off mulch, and you will yard waste, but then you will also see, well, I'm trying to find it.
And I will also share in the follow-up email, I'll make sure we have links to all of our yard waste information as well on our website. So you'll get that on Monday.
All right. And I am sending this out there. Living Earth is our contractor, and you can contact them. Contact information is, I believe, on that link. Excellent. Thank you all very much.
All right. Well, if that's it, thanks again for joining us. Like I said, you'll get a follow-up email that will have this recording. It will have all of the slides available for you and a few other bits of information and links. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday and are ready to get composting in your backyard.
Thank you all very much.